I'm a leaner, 34 female. I live alone in a quiet, two-story colonial that feels 3 sizes too big for one person, in a town where the rustle of autumn leaves is the loudest sound on the street. It's the house my husband, David, and I bought together, the one he, as an architect, meticulously renovated with his own hands. Now, his blueprints are rolled up in the attic, his tools are neatly organized in the garage, and I am the sole occupant of the future he designed for us. I work as an archivist for the county library, a job that suits my temperament. I spend my days preserving the memories of others, digitizing old photographs, cataloging forgotten letters, and binding the fragile histories of families who have long since vanished. It's methodical, quiet work that requires patience and a gentle touch, and it has been my sanctuary for the last 2 years. My life wasn't supposed to be this quiet. It was supposed to be filled with the cheerful chaos of children, the comfortable rhythm of a shared life, and the endless, fascinating conversations I only ever had with David. But a slick patch of ice on a winter morning and a truck that lost control took all of that away. Now, the silence in this house is a physical presence, a constant companion that reminds me of everything I've lost. For 2 years, my family treated my grief like a temporary illness they hoped I'd recover from quickly. They sent condolences, dropped off casseroles for a week, and then, slowly but surely, they faded back into their own busy lives, expecting me to do the same. I learned that the world doesn't stop for a broken heart, it just steps around it and keeps moving. But there was one day I thought would be different. One day I thought they would remember. The day I found out that even the deepest bonds of family can be severed not by a dramatic explosion, but by the slow, corrosive drip of indifference. This is the story of how the crushing weight of being forgotten finally forced me to find myself. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The second anniversary of David's death began not with a storm of tears, but with a profound and aching stillness. The sun rose, casting long, gentle shadows across the bedroom floor, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny, carefree ghosts. I had deliberately not set an alarm, allowing myself to wake with the natural rhythm of the day, a small act of kindness in a world that had been anything but kind. For a fleeting, blissful moment upon waking, I forgot. I felt the familiar weight of the blankets, heard the distant chirp of a bird outside the window, and I almost reached for the other side of the bed. But the cold emptiness beside me was a swift and brutal reminder. He wasn't there. He would never be there again. My breath caught in my chest, the familiar prelude to a wave of grief. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shaky breath, and forced myself to get up. Today was about honoring him, not drowning in my own sorrow. I had a routine for these milestone days, birthdays, our wedding anniversary, and this one, the day he was taken. It was a quiet, personal liturgy of remembrance. I started by making his favorite breakfast, blueberry pancakes. The recipe was committed to memory, a simple concoction of flour, sugar, eggs, and milk that he had declared the best he'd ever had. The familiar smell filled the kitchen, a bittersweet aroma that brought a faint smile to my lips. I set 2 plates at the small kitchen table, one for me and one for him, just as we always did. I poured 2 cups of coffee, black for him, a splash of cream for me. I ate slowly, the silence of the house amplifying the sound of my fork against the plate. I spoke to him in my head, a running monologue that had become second nature. I told him about the leaky faucet I'd finally fixed myself, about the new book I was reading, about the funny thing our neighbor's dog did yesterday. It felt less like talking to the dead, and more like catching up with someone who was just in the next room. After breakfast, I went to his closet. His clothes still hung there, smelling faintly of him, a mixture of sawdust, fresh linen, and the cologne I'd bought him for his last birthday. I pulled out his favorite gray sweater, the one with the worn elbows, and held it to my face, breathing him in. The pain was sharp, a physical blow to my chest, but it was a pain I welcomed. It was proof that what we had was real, that the love was so immense its absence could still wound me so deeply. I put the sweater on. It was big on me, the sleeves hanging past my fingertips, but it felt like an embrace. Wrapped in his sweater, I spent the rest of the morning in his office, the one room in the house I had kept exactly as he'd left it. His architectural sketches were still pinned to the corkboard, his pencils were still sharpened in a ceramic mug, and a half-finished cup of coffee still sat on a coaster, now a petrified ring of brown. My work as an archivist had taught me the power of preservation, and this room was my most precious archive. I didn't tidy or clean. I just sat in his worn leather chair, running my fingers over the spines of his books and reading the notes he'd scribbled in the margins. All through these quiet rituals, a small, hopeful part of my brain kept a vigilant watch on my phone. It sat on the corner of his desk, screen dark, silent. I expected a call, or at least a text. From my mother, Carol. From my brother, Liam, just a simple, "Thinking of you today, Aliner." Or, "How are you holding up?" That's all it would have taken. A small acknowledgement that they remembered, that they knew this day was carved into my soul with a jagged knife. Last year, on the first anniversary, the calls had come. They were brief, a little awkward, full of platitudes about how strong I was and how time heals all wounds, but they had come. I clung to that precedent, that small thread of familial duty, as proof that I wasn't entirely alone in my grief. The family dynamic had always been skewed. Liam, my younger brother by 3 years, was the sun around which our family's solar system revolved. He was the charming one, the successful real estate agent with the flashy smile and the big personality. His victories were celebrated with loud, extravagant dinners. His minor setbacks were treated as Shakespearean tragedies. I, on the other hand, was the quiet moon reflecting his light. My accomplishments were met with a polite, "Oh, that's nice, dear." My struggles were often dismissed with a brisk, "You're so sensible, Aliner, you'll figure it out." My mother, Carol, was the chief architect of this system. She adored her son, seeing in him a reflection of her own ambitions. She loved me, I suppose, in her own way, but it was a quieter, more utilitarian love. I was the dependable one, the one who didn't need as much attention. As noon came and went, my hope began to curdle into a familiar, sour disappointment. The phone remained silent. I told myself they were busy. Mom was probably helping Liam with something. He was always in the middle of a big deal, a big project, a big something. I tried to be understanding. People forget. Life moves on. But a knot of resentment was tightening in my stomach. How could they forget this? Did David's life, his presence in our family for over a decade, mean so little that the day he was violently ripped from it was just another Friday on their calendar? The afternoon bled into the evening. The sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the kind of spectacular sunset David would have dragged me outside to watch. I stood at the window, his sweater still enveloping me, and watched it alone. The loneliness was no longer a quiet ache. It was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Finally, unable to bear the silence of the house any longer, I picked up my phone. Not to call them, my pride wouldn't allow that, but to seek some mindless distraction on social media, a digital anesthetic for a wound I couldn't numb. I opened the app, my thumb scrolling numbly through pictures of vacations, babies, and professionally lit dinners. And then I saw it, a new post from my mother. It was a picture of Liam, standing in front of a sleek, obscenely expensive-looking sports car, the kind of car that screamed for attention. He had his arms slung possessively over the metallic blue roof, a wide, triumphant grin plastered on his face. The caption my mother had written was a gushing tribute. "So incredibly proud of my amazing son, Liam, all his hard work has paid off. He treated himself to a new ride today. Nothing but the best for the best. Proud mom success, hard work pays off." My thumb froze over the screen. The post was 2 hours old. While I had been sitting in my dead husband's office, wrapped in his sweater, waiting for a single word of comfort, my entire family was celebrating a car. The image on the screen seemed to burn itself into my retinas. Liam's smug grin, the arrogant glint of sunlight off the car's polished hood, my mother's effusive hashtags. Every detail was a separate, stinging slap in the face. It wasn't just a picture, it was a declaration. It was a bright, shiny, metallic blue monument to their priorities. I sank onto the edge of the sofa, the phone feeling heavy and cold in my hand. My heart, which had been aching with a dull grief all day, now began to pound with a sharp, furious rhythm. A hot, acidic anger rose in my throat, so potent it almost made me gag. They hadn't forgotten. Forgetting is passive. This felt active. This was a conscious choice. They had chosen to celebrate a material possession over acknowledging a human life, a life that had been intricately woven into the fabric of our family. Lie. My thumb, acting of its own accord, tapped on the comments section. It was a cascade of digital backpatting. My Aunt Susan had written, "Wow, go Liam, you deserve all the success in the world." My cousin Mark chimed in with, "Sick ride, man, we have to go for a spin." And there, right at the top, was a comment from my own mother, a reply to a friend. "We're all just so thrilled for him. He's been working non-stop. It's a joy to see him so happy." A joy. While I was reliving the worst day of my life, they were experiencing joy over a depreciating asset. I scrolled back to the picture, my eyes fixated on Liam's face. He looked so pleased with himself, so utterly consumed by his own success. Did he even remember what day it was? Had it crossed his mind for even a fleeting second? Knowing my brother, it was unlikely. His world was a feedback loop of his own achievements, and anything outside of that barely registered. But my mother knew. She had been there at the hospital. She had held my hand at the funeral. She knew what this day meant. The profound loneliness I had felt earlier now felt naive. This was something colder, something sharper. This was erasure. It was as if my grief was an inconvenience, a somber mood they didn't want ruining their celebration. My life, my pain, my love for David, it had all been deemed less important than a new car. I felt a desperate, foolish urge to comment on the post. To write, "Today is the 2nd anniversary of David's death," and just leave it there. A tiny grenade of truth dropped into their sanitized, celebratory echo chamber. I wanted to see how they would react, how they would spin it, how my mother would rush to smooth things over with a placating, "Oh, Eleanor, of course we haven't forgotten. We were just trying to bring some positivity into the family." But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Exposing my pain in such a public forum felt like handing them a weapon. They would turn it back on me, accuse me of being jealous, of trying to make everything about myself, of not being happy for my brother's success. I knew the script by heart. Instead, I did something I knew I would regret. I sent a text message directly to my mother. My fingers trembled as I typed, my vision blurred by unshed tears. "Hi, Mom, just having a quiet day here, thinking of David." It was a test. A small, vulnerable flag raised in the hopes of being seen. I hit send and watched the screen, my chest tight with anticipation. For 5 long minutes, there was nothing. Then, the 3 little dots appeared, indicating she was typing. They appeared, vanished, and then appeared again. I could almost hear the conversation on the other end, Liam probably rolling his eyes, telling her not to let me bring down the mood. Finally, a message popped up. "Hi, honey. Yes, it's a sad day. We're thinking of him too. We're just having a little family get-together to celebrate Liam's new car. He's been so stressed, he really needed this. Talk to you tomorrow." I read the message once, twice, 3 times. Each word was a carefully chosen brush-off. "A sad day," she acknowledged, as if commenting on the weather. The casual mention of a little family get-together was the final twist of the knife. They were together, celebrating without me, and the excuse that Liam needed this because he was stressed was so absurd, so insulting, it was almost laughable. Stressed. My 31-year-old brother was stressed from selling expensive houses, so he needed a 6-figure sports car to feel better. And I, the 34-year-old widow, was expected to just understand and quietly endure my grief alone. The message wasn't an apology or an invitation, it was a boundary. It said, "Your grief is not welcome here today. We are busy being happy." That was the moment the dam broke. The tears I had been holding back all day finally came, hot and furious. It wasn't the gentle, sorrowful weeping of grief. It was a storm of rage and betrayal. I threw my phone across the room, and it hit the opposite wall with a sickening clatter. I didn't care if it was broken. I wanted to break something. I wanted to scream. All the years of being the sensible one, the low-maintenance daughter, the one who never made a fuss, had led to this. To being so utterly invisible that my deepest pain was less significant than a luxury purchase. They hadn't just forgotten David, they had forgotten me. My husband's death had apparently relegated me to the background of my own family's story, a sad, minor character they could conveniently ignore when my plotline became too somber. The betrayal felt absolute. It wasn't just that they didn't call. It was that they had gathered to celebrate the epitome of shallow materialism on a day that should have been reserved for a sacred memory. They had replaced remembrance with revelry, and in doing so, they had shown me exactly where I stood. I was alone, utterly and completely alone, and as I sat there, sobbing in the encroaching darkness of David's house, a new feeling began to crystallize beneath the pain. A cold, hard, and unfamiliar resolve. The storm of tears eventually subsided, leaving behind the kind of eerie calm that follows a hurricane. The raw, open wound of betrayal was still there, but something else was beginning to form over it, a protective layer of cold, clear-eyed anger. The weeping had been for the Alina who still craved her family's approval, the one who waited by the phone for a scrap of acknowledgement. That Alina, I realized with a startling clarity, had died a little that night. In her place was someone new, someone I didn't quite recognize yet. She was quiet, calculating, and fueled by a righteous fury that felt both terrifying and empowering. The sadness was still there, a deep, resonant hum beneath the surface, but it was no longer the dominant frequency. The dominant frequency was now rage. For the next few days, I was a ghost in my own life. I went to work, performed my duties with the detached precision of a machine, and came home to the suffocating silence of the house. I didn't answer my phone when my mother called the next day, her voice on the voicemail syrupy with false concern. I deleted the text from Liam that said, "Mom said you were upset yesterday. Hope you're feeling better." There was no apology, no acknowledgement of their callousness, just an insinuation that my feelings were an inconvenience that I needed to get over. Each ignored call, each deleted message, was a small act of rebellion. It was me, taking back a tiny piece of the power I had so willingly given away for years. During this period of self-imposed isolation, my mind began to work like the archivist I was. I started to sift through my memories, not with the soft filter of nostalgia, but with the sharp, analytical eye of a researcher looking for a pattern. And the pattern was undeniable. I remembered the Christmas after David died, when my mother insisted I come to their house, only to spend the entire day talking about Liam's promotion. I remembered my birthday a few months ago, when my mother cut our phone call short because Liam was dropping by to show her a new watch he'd bought. I recalled dozens of small incidents, little dismissals and casual slights that, at the time, I had excused as thoughtlessness. Now, I saw them for what they were, data points in a long-running study of my own irrelevance. My role in the family was to be a quiet, stable presence, a reliable supporting character who never upstaged the star. David's death hadn't created this dynamic, it had only amplified it. This cold anger needed a focus, a direction. I couldn't keep pacing the floors of my too-big house, stewing in a potent cocktail of grief and fury. I needed to do something. On a whim, driven by a restless energy I didn't understand, I decided to finally tackle a task I had been avoiding for 2 years, organizing David's office. It had remained a perfect, heartbreaking time capsule of the last morning of his life. Facing it felt like a final, brutal acceptance of his absence. But now it felt different. It felt like reclaiming a part of my own home, a part of my own life. I started with the stacks of books, carefully boxing them up for donation, keeping only the ones with his precious, scribbled notes in the margins. I filed away his sketches and blueprints, my fingers tracing the clean, confident lines he had drawn. The process was painful, but it was also cleansing. With each box I packed, I felt a layer of inertia sloughing off. It was in the bottom drawer of his large metal filing cabinet, behind the files for household warranties and tax returns, that I found it. It was a thick, dark green binder, immaculately organized, with a single white label on the spine printed in David's neat, architectural block letters. Family Investments. My brow furrowed in confusion. David had managed our finances, but I had never heard him mention this. Our personal investments were all in a separate file, one I had painfully sorted through with our lawyer months after his death. This was something different. My heart began to beat a little faster as I lifted the heavy binder and placed it on his desk. I opened it. The first page was a mission statement of sorts, a letter written by David addressed to me. "To my Ellie," it began, and my breath hitched. "If you're reading this without me, then the worst has happened, and for that, my love, I am endlessly sorry. I put this together to make things easier. This binder contains the details of the investment portfolio I started and have been managing for both our parents. A nest egg to make sure they are comfortable and secure in their retirement. I used a portion of my own inheritance from my grandparents to start it, and I've been contributing to it ever since. My dream was that we could all grow old without financial worries, a gift to the people who gave us everything." My eyes filled with tears. This was so quintessentially David. Thoughtful, generous, always planning for the future, always taking care of everyone. I turned the page. It was filled with spreadsheets, account statements, and legal documents. It detailed a significant sum of money, far more than I could have imagined, that David had skillfully invested and grown over the past decade. It was a testament to his quiet brilliance and his deep love for his family and mine. As I delved deeper, I found another section labeled Legacy Fund. The documents here outlined a separate trust he had established for us, for our future. It was meant to fund our children's education, to allow us to travel the world, to be a safety net for our own old age. But there was a specific clause that caught my eye. It stipulated that the fund could also be used to provide support to our extended family, my brother, his parents, in times of genuine and significant need, such as a medical emergency or a catastrophic job loss. The final document in the binder was a legal letter from his financial advisor, a man I vaguely remembered meeting at a few holiday parties. His name was Mark. The letter confirmed that in the event of David's death, I, Eleanor Vance, was named as the sole executor of his estate and had ultimate authority over all these accounts. A cold, electric thrill shot through me. Ultimate authority. The words echoed in the quiet room, filled with a sudden, startling weight. My family had celebrated a car while I grieved. They had no idea that the man they had so easily forgotten had spent years quietly building the very foundation of their financial security. And now, it was all in my hands. The discovery of the binder was like finding a map and a key in the middle of a dark, unfamiliar forest. For the first time in 2 years, I felt a sense of purpose that wasn't tied to simply surviving my grief. My professional instincts kicked in. As an archivist, my job was to uncover the truth hidden in documents, to follow the paper trail, and to piece together a coherent narrative from disparate facts. I was about to apply those skills to my own life. I spent the rest of the weekend poring over every single page in that binder. I cross-referenced dates, highlighted account numbers, and made a list of every transaction David had ever recorded. His record-keeping was, like everything else he did, flawless. The spreadsheets showed a steady, impressive growth in the family investments fund, a testament to his patient and intelligent strategy. But as I got to the statements from the last 2 years, after his death, I noticed a change. The steady upward climb had begun to falter, punctuated by a series of large, irregular withdrawals. My blood ran cold as I examined the dates. The first major withdrawal was made about 18 months ago, a very large sum. I thought back. What had happened 18 months ago? I racked my brain, trying to pierce the fog of grief that had shrouded that first year. And then it hit me. That was when Liam had quit his job at a large, established real estate firm to start his own boutique agency. He had thrown a lavish launch party, bragging to everyone about being his own boss and making his own rules. At the time, I had vaguely wondered how he'd afforded the swanky downtown office space and the expensive marketing campaign. My mother had just waved it off, saying he had investors. The next significant withdrawal was about 6 months ago, another huge chunk of money. I didn't even have to think about that one. That was when Liam had taken the entire family, minus me because I probably wasn't up for it, on a 2-week vacation to Italy. He had posted dozens of pictures of my mother beaming in front of the Colosseum, of him raising a glass of wine in Tuscany. Now, the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The new sports car. It all lined up. The investor was David. The source of his flashy lifestyle was my dead husband's carefully curated legacy. The anger I felt was so pure, so intense, it made my hands shake. They had been raiding this fund, David's gift, to finance Liam's ego. They had been treating this sacred trust, meant for their parents' retirement and security, like a personal ATM. And they had done it all behind my back, assuming, correctly until now, that I was too lost in my grief to ever notice. But I needed more than just a strong suspicion. I needed confirmation. I needed to talk to Mark, the financial advisor whose name was on the legal documents. Finding his contact information was easy. He was listed on the firm's letterhead. Making the call, however, was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. My voice trembled as I introduced myself to the receptionist and asked to speak with him. I was transferred, and a moment later, a warm, professional voice said, "Mark speaking." I took a deep breath. "Mark, my name is Eleanor Vance. I was David's wife." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then his voice softened considerably. "Eleanor, of course, I am so sorry for your loss. David was a wonderful man, one of the best." His genuine sympathy almost broke my resolve, but I held it together. "Thank you, Mark. I know this is out of the blue, but I've just come across some financial documents David had, and your name is on them. I was hoping you could help me understand a few things." We scheduled a meeting for the following afternoon. I walked into the sleek, intimidatingly corporate office of the financial firm feeling small and out of my depth. But when Mark came out to greet me, his kind eyes and gentle handshake put me at ease. He wasn't the slick salesman I had imagined. He was a man in his early 40s with a reassuringly calm demeanor. He looked like the kind of person you could trust. I hoped I was right. In the quiet of his office, I laid the green binder on his polished desk. "David called this the Family Investments Fund," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. Mark nodded, a sad smile on his face. "Yes, he was very proud of it. He talked about it all the time. He called it his Make Sure Everyone Is Okay fund. He was a planner." "He named me as the executor," I said, getting to the point, "with ultimate authority over the accounts. But I've been looking at the statements from the past 2 years, and I've seen some very large withdrawals. I need to know who authorized them." Mark's professional demeanor flickered, and a look of discomfort crossed his face. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Eleanor, I'm glad you called. I have been in a very difficult position. Legally, your authority is ironclad. You are the sole executor. But shortly after David passed, your mother, Carol, and your brother, Liam, came to see me." My stomach tightened. "They told me they had spoken with you," he continued, looking me directly in the eye, "and that you were too overwhelmed with grief to handle the financial details. They said you had given them your verbal consent to manage the fund on behalf of the family." A wave of nausea washed over me. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. "I did no such thing," I said, my voice a whisper. "I never spoke to them about this. I didn't even know it existed." Mark nodded slowly, his expression grim. "I suspected as much, but they were very convincing. They cited the genuine need clause from the Legacy Fund Trust, claiming Liam's new business venture was a critical family investment that would yield huge returns for everyone. They were insistent. I pushed back. I told them I needed written consent from you, but your mother, she was very emotional. She accused me of disrespecting David's wishes to help his family." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I made a mistake, Eleanor. I should have called you directly, but I let them pressure me. I authorized the transfers based on their misrepresentation. The money for the business, the loan for the car, it all came from that fund." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. It was all true. They had lied, manipulated, and plundered the money David had worked so hard to save for their own selfish desires. They had used my grief as a cover story, a tool to enable their greed. Mark slid a folder across the desk towards me. "These are copies of every withdrawal authorization they signed. The reasons they gave are all documented. I had a feeling this day might come." I opened the folder. There it was, in black and white. My mother's signature, my brother's signature, over and over again. They hadn't just taken the money. They had left a detailed confession. I left Mark's office in a daze, the folder of documents clutched in my hand like a holy relic. The drive home was a blur. The simmering anger I had been nursing for days had now been forged into something cold, hard, and sharp. It was the anger of a protector whose sacred ground had been desecrated. They hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen David's legacy of generosity and twisted it into something ugly and selfish. They had used his love as their personal slush fund. In that moment, sitting in my car in the driveway of the home David built, I made a promise to him and to myself. This would not stand. I would not be the quiet, sensible Aliner anymore. I would be the executor of his will in every sense of the word. That evening, I didn't grieve. I strategized. I spread the documents from Mark across the dining room table, the same table where David and I had shared so many meals. The warm, domestic space was transformed into a war room. My mission was clear. I needed to reclaim what they had taken and ensure they could never do it again. But how? A dramatic, emotional confrontation would get me nowhere. They would gaslight me, twist my words, and paint me as the villain, the hysterical, grieving widow who was jealous of her brother's success. I had seen them do it 100 times to other people. No, emotion was their weapon of choice. Mine would be facts. Cold, undeniable, meticulously organized facts. My archivist's mind went to work. My plan began to form, step by logical step. First, secure the assets. The next morning, I was back in Mark's office. I want to exercise my full authority as executor, I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. Immediately. I want all access to the Family Investments Fund and the Legacy Fund frozen for everyone but me. I want to change all passwords, all security questions, and I want a statement issued to my mother and brother informing them that the accounts are now under a formal review by the estate's executor. Mark, looking relieved to finally be on the right side of the issue, nodded enthusiastically. Consider it done, Aliner. We can have the paperwork drawn up and executed by the end of the day. This was the first move, cutting off their supply line. They wouldn't know why, not yet. They would just hit a wall where there used to be an open door. Second, quantify the damage. I spent the next several days with Mark, conducting a full financial audit. We calculated the exact amount they had withdrawn, down to the last cent. Then, we calculated what that money would have been worth if it had been left in the market to grow, as David had intended. The number was staggering. It wasn't just what they had taken, it was the future growth they had stolen from their own parents. Mark helped me prepare a series of clear, easy-to-read charts and statements that laid out the financial story in stark, undeniable terms. There was the principal, the withdrawals, and the lost potential gains. It was a brutal narrative of greed and financial irresponsibility. Third, set the stage. An ambush wouldn't work. I needed to get them in a room together on my turf where I could control the environment. A week after freezing the accounts, I sent a simple group text to my mother and Liam. Hi both. I know things have been distant between us lately, and I'd like to change that. I want to have you over for dinner on Saturday night to reconnect. My treat. The bait was simple, unassuming. It played into their perception of me as the one who always seeks to smooth things over. My mother responded almost immediately. Oh, honey, that's a wonderful idea. We'd love to. Liam's response came an hour later. Sure, I can make time. 7 p.m.? They had no idea they were RSVPing to their own reckoning. Fourth, prepare the evidence. The final step was to assemble my presentation. I didn't want a messy pile of papers. I wanted something that conveyed the seriousness of the situation. I went to an office supply store and bought a professional-grade presentation binder with clear plastic sleeves. Into it, I methodically placed each piece of evidence. I started with a copy of David's mission statement, his letter to me. Then came the account statements showing the fund's healthy growth under his management. Next, I inserted the withdrawal slips they had signed, each one in its own sleeve, the damning signatures clearly visible. I followed those with the charts mark I had prepared, illustrating the financial damage in bold colors. The final page was a copy of the legal document naming me as sole executor, with the relevant passage highlighted in yellow. The completed binder was heavy, both physically and metaphorically. It felt like an instrument of justice. As I worked, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't nervous or scared. I felt like I was channeling David's methodical energy. He was an architect, he built things with precision and care. I was an archivist, I preserved truth. In this plan, our skills had merged. I was preserving his truth by building an unassailable case against those who had tried to erase it. On the Saturday of the dinner, I cooked David's favorite meal, roasted chicken with rosemary potatoes. It felt fitting. The evening would begin as a tribute to him and end with the defense of his legacy. As I set the table, I placed the thick binder on the sideboard ready. When the doorbell rang at precisely 7 p.m., I took one last deep breath, smoothed down my dress, and went to open the door, a serene smile on my face. The performance was about to begin. My mother and Liam arrived bearing a cheap bottle of wine and an air of magnanimous forgiveness, as if they were gracing me with their presence after my recent emotional outburst. "Eleanor, darling, the house looks lovely," my mother said, kissing the air beside my cheek. "It's so good to see you smiling again." Liam gave me a perfunctory hug, his eyes already scanning the room, probably assessing its resale value. "Yeah, Ellie, looking good," he said, his tone dismissive. "Smells good in here." They were completely at ease, utterly oblivious. They saw me as they had always seen me, quiet, accommodating, and ultimately insignificant. I played my part perfectly. I was the gracious hostess, pouring wine, making small talk about the weather, and asking Liam about his latest real estate triumphs. He was more than happy to oblige, launching into a long, self-congratulatory monologue about a multi-million-dollar property he had just sold. My mother watched him with undisguised adoration, interjecting with comments like, "He has such a gift with people," and "He just works so incredibly hard." I listened, nodding and smiling, my gaze occasionally drifting to the thick green binder on the sideboard. With every boastful word that came out of my brother's mouth, the resolve in my heart hardened into steel. He was bragging about the success he had purchased with my dead husband's money. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. We ate dinner, and the conversation remained firmly centered on Liam. I learned about his new marketing strategy, his plans to expand his agency, and the custom upgrades he was planning for his new car. Not once did they ask me a meaningful question about my life. They didn't ask about my work, my friends, or how I was managing in this big, empty house. The dinner was not about reconnecting with me. It was about giving them another platform to perform their favorite drama, the wonderful success of Liam. When the last of the plates were cleared, I took a deep breath. "I'm so glad you could both come," I began, my voice even and calm. "There was something important I wanted to discuss with you in person." My mother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. She hated serious conversations that weren't about her son's achievements. "Well, what is it, dear?" she asked, a hint of impatience in her voice. Liam leaned back in his chair, looking bored. "If this is about that other day, Ellie, I hope you're not still upset. We were just trying to have a little fun." "In a way, it is about that day," I replied smoothly. I stood up, walked to the sideboard, and picked up the binder. I placed it on the center of the table with a soft, definitive thud. The mood in the room shifted instantly. The binder, with its official-looking label, radiated an authority that they were not used to seeing from me. Liam eyed it with suspicion. "What is that? Some work thing?" "No," I said, opening it to the first page. "This is a family thing." I turned the binder so they could see David's letter. "This is a letter David wrote to me. It's about a financial portfolio he created and managed. He called it the Family Investments Fund." I paused, letting the words sink in. My mother's expression flickered from confusion to a dawning, panicked recognition. Liam just looked annoyed. I slowly turned the pages, talking them through it as if they were children and I was their teacher. David started this fund with his own inheritance. His goal was to provide a secure retirement for his parents, and for you, Mom. I showed them the early statements, the ones that showed David's patient, steady contributions and the impressive growth he had cultivated. "He was a brilliant planner," I said, my voice thick with a genuine pride that cut through my anger. "He wanted to take care of everyone." Then I turned to the next section. After David passed away, things changed. I slid the first withdrawal slip across the table, the one for the down payment on Liam's office. His signature was scrawled at the bottom. Liam, you told me you had investors for your new agency. I then presented the next slip. And you told me this family trip to Italy was a bonus you'd earned. Finally, I placed the statement showing the most recent and most egregious withdrawal in front of them. And this, I assume, was for the car. Liam's face had gone from smug to pale. My mother was staring at the documents as if they were snakes, refusing to meet my eyes. "What is this, Alina?" Liam finally blustered, his voice an octave too high. "It's family money. David would have wanted to help me." "Would he?" I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. "David's will established a legacy fund for emergencies. Was a six-figure sports car a medical emergency, Liam? Was it a catastrophic job loss?" My mother finally spoke, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "How dare you, Alina? We were struggling. Your brother needed that support. You were so low. Sent in your grief, we had to make the decisions for the family." "Only thing I was lost in," I said, my eyes locking onto hers, "was the belief that you actually cared. You lied. You told Mark, David's financial advisor, that I was too distraught to manage the estate and that I had given you my permission." I slid the final document in front of them, the legal notice of executorship. I tapped the highlighted sentence. "As it turns out, I am the sole executor, and I never gave you permission for anything because I didn't even know this fund existed." The silence in the room was absolute. Liam was speechless, his bravado completely deflated. My mother looked trapped, her usual manipulations useless against the mountain of evidence in front of her. "You stood by and let me grieve alone," I said, my voice finally cracking with the pain I had suppressed for so long. "On the anniversary of my husband's death, you celebrated a car that you bought with his money. You didn't just forget him, you desecrated his memory." I stood up, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Effective last Monday, I have exercised my legal right as executor. The accounts are frozen. Your access is permanently revoked." Liam shot to his feet. "You can't do that." "I can," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound power. "And I have." My mother burst into tears, the crocodile tears of someone who has finally been caught. "Alina, you're being cruel, after all we've done for you." "No," I said, looking at them both, truly seeing them for the selfish, greedy strangers they were. "I'm being the executor. I'm protecting my husband's legacy from the very people he tried to protect. Now, I think this dinner is over. Please leave my house." Their departure was not quiet. Liam, his face flushed with impotent rage, tried to argue, to threaten. He sputtered about lawyers and family obligations, but his words were hollow. He knew, looking at the binder still sitting on the table, that he had no legal ground to stand on. My mother alternated between pathetic, sobbing appeals and sharp, venomous accusations. She called me ungrateful, cold-hearted, and vindictive. She claimed I was trying to destroy the family out of jealousy for Liam's success. It was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, but for the first time in my life, her words had no effect on me. They were just noise, the desperate static of a signal that could no longer find a receiver. I didn't engage, I didn't argue. I simply stood by the open door, my arms crossed, and waited for them to leave. When they finally stormed out, slamming the door behind them, the silence that descended on the house was not lonely. It was peaceful. It was the sound of victory. The weeks that followed were exactly as I had anticipated. My phone was bombarded with a relentless assault of voicemails and text messages. Liam sent long, rambling texts that swung wildly between threats of legal action and pathetic attempts to justify his behavior. My mother's messages were a toxic blend of guilt-tripping and passive aggression. "I don't know how you can sleep at night, knowing you've torn your family apart," one read. "I hope all that money keeps you warm at night because you'll have no one else," said another. I read each one, not with pain, but with a detached sense of confirmation. This was who they were. This was who they had always been. I had just refused to see it. I saved every message, every voicemail, creating a new archive, an archive of their true character. But I never once replied. My silence was my new power. I met with Mark again, and together we executed the final phase of my plan. I was not going to be the cruel monster they painted me as. I was going to be David's executor, honoring his true intentions. We restructured the entire portfolio. I took the family investments fund and divided it. The portion that was rightfully my mother's retirement, based on David's original plan, was placed into an ironclad, professionally managed trust. The trust was designed to cover her and my father's legitimate living and medical expenses for the rest of their lives. She would receive a monthly stipend, enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. All requests for additional funds for non-essential items would have to be submitted in writing to a board of trustees, of which I was the head. There would be no more lump sums for cars or vacations. Her financial security was guaranteed, but her access to a slush fund was gone forever. As for Liam's share, the amount he and my mother had borrowed was calculated, along with the interest it would have accrued. This sum was formally designated as an advance on any future inheritance from my parents' side of the family. A legal document was drafted and sent to him, explaining that the money for his business and his car had been his inheritance, spent ahead of time. There would be nothing else. I had, in effect, allowed him to keep what he had. Stolen, but I had recontextualized it not as a gift, but as the entirety of his legacy. He had traded his future security for a flashy present. The final piece was the legacy fund, the money David had set aside for us, for our future children. I left it untouched, a sacred memorial to the life we were supposed to have. But I made a new addition to my own will. If I were to pass away without children, the entirety of that fund would be used to create a scholarship for underprivileged architecture students at David's alma mater. His legacy of building futures would live on, helping those who deserved it, not those who merely felt entitled to it. Months have passed since that dinner. I haven't spoken to my mother or brother, and I don't know if I ever will. The profound loneliness that was once a crushing weight has lifted. It has been replaced by a quiet strength and a deep, abiding sense of self-respect. I live in this house not as a ghost, but as its guardian. I have found a new purpose, not just preserving the memories of the past, but protecting the integrity of the future David envisioned. Sometimes, late at night, I go into his office. I no longer sit in his chair and cry. I sit at his desk, managing the scholarship fund, reviewing the trust statements, and carrying on his work. I am no longer just a leaner, the quiet archivist, the grieving widow. I am a leaner Vance, the executor of a legacy, the protector of a dream. And in the peaceful silence of the house that love built, I am finally, completely, at home with myself.